Even today, it is still very difficult for anybody with a disability to access training in aerial sports. Despite the French disability law of 11th of February 2005, the aim of which was to improve accessibility across society, disabled people still encounter many obstacles along the way, and for deaf people, ensuring access to their right to pilot an aircraft is a struggle.
It used to be against the law, and now it has finally become accessible thanks to the French Aero Club for the Deaf Association, which I created. It enables deaf pilots to access training in aircrafts and ultralight planes. Over the last 20 years, enormous progress has been made. Things are just getting better and better. Many deaf students become ultralight plane and aircraft pilots, but it's a real struggle. So I came across this association which was fighting to improve accessibility for deaf people. And I met Henri, who showed me that we could fly as well. When I met Henri, he is somebody who is quite extraordinary, somebody who is fighting to ensure that deaf people are able to fly just like hearing people. And it was this dynamism, the dynamism of deaf pilots, which encouraged me to join the French Aero Club for the Deaf. I wondered how communication between the deaf and hearing people worked. I went to see for myself, and I realized that in fact they were using French Sign Language. They were using sign language, so in fact the instructors were deaf, and to take part in the training, everything was said in sign language. All the theory and the rules, the assessments. And as a result, I was able to really take everything on board. I understood absolutely everything. So we were really at the same level as hearing people during training, 100%. And that's really great. Yes, I think that the Aero Club is a really interesting activity because the deaf pilots are able to fly possibly even better than a speaking pilot. On my first flight, I realized that in fact everything was really very visual and that we had instructions on the screen, the direction to take, altitude, and so on. Everything is displayed in detail. So it's all visual. Once you're up there, you're completely safe. I'm really proud because here in France there are more than 30 deaf ULM pilots, 2 deaf private pilot license holders, and also 4 deaf light aircraft pilot license holders. We are the very first in the world to have created a school for ultralight plane pilots with a deaf instructor who knows how to support deaf students. Here at the airfield in Coulommiers in the French department of Seine-et-Marne.
I started learning aviation in 2006. How did I get into aviation? Actually, it was just by chance that one day, one of my dad's customers offered me the opportunity to experience a short flight. And I just thought to myself, okay, why not? I boarded, we took off and went for a short flight, which left me with a feeling of extreme freedom and was an intensely emotional experience. When we landed, the pilot next to me asked, "Did you enjoy it?" I absolutely loved it. And he was an instructor himself. He asked me if I would like to learn to fly. Wow, why not? Okay, definitely yes. Time passed, and slowly but surely, I became increasingly passionate about it.
I always dreamed of being a pilot. I did some research on Facebook and I found the French Aero Club for the Deaf, and I was able to go and visit them in person. And they were celebrating their 20th anniversary. I met an instructor, Henri. He was really very open and strives for accessibility for deaf people who dream of becoming pilots. So just out of curiosity, I wanted to visit Coulommiers to see for myself what happens and meet with Henri, who offered to take me on a flight. It was the first time I had ever come across a deaf pilot. I didn't think that a deaf person would be able to pilot without a radio. For me, it simply wasn't possible. But I was able to see that it was indeed possible, and it made me really want to undergo training myself. I also found a company working in connection with aeronautics, and I've been able to show all my colleagues that I'm just as able to be a ULM pilot, and that made me really proud. And how many years have you been here? I learned to fly in 1982. And after 2,300 hours of flying, I obtained my PPL diploma for America, England, France, and Australia. I've been a member of the Air France Aero Club for 3 years. There's a control tower here that I'm in contact with. The control tower sends me green and red flashing signals for communication and authorizations, and depending on the response, I take off. It's the same when I return. They send me a flashing signal before I land. So since you've got several licenses, American, English, Australian, and French, do you think you could fly from France to the United States? In America, there are more than 250 deaf and hard of hearing people who have their PPL licenses. I traveled to the United States in 1990 for my PPL. And when I returned, things just sped up. In England too, there are more than 4 deaf PPL license holders and around 10 LAPLs currently undergoing training. European legislation is evolving. There are fewer than 10 deaf student pilots in France, England, Australia, and America. Flying from France to the United States is something I dream of. And I think it's possible. Manon's training started in 2006. She continued her training until 2011, and she always applied herself, and it has always been a pleasure to fly with Manon. And at no point has it been an inconvenience within the context of her training. At the time when Manon's training started, I could never have imagined that we could teach deaf people, deaf pilots, motorized flight. And this was primarily because I always considered that a permanent radio contact was essential, whereas in fact there are a lot of airfields on which there is no need for radio, and it is possible to fly across all of France from one place to another without ever entering a controlled area and needing a radio. So in fact, at that point I understood that it was possible to undergo comprehensive training and become a pilot as a deaf person.
It's important as well to understand that in France, 1/3 of airfields are controlled. So that means that 2/3 remain accessible across France because radio is not compulsory. If the airfield is not controlled, you can fly without a radio. In a controlled area, you are required to have a radio, but I can't hear anything, so I can't fly in those areas. I am obliged to fly around this controlled airspace.
We are witnessing developments today, or rather, developments are in progress, and research is being carried out into radio communication over IT systems. And today, in airliners, systems are being introduced where vocal communication is no longer necessary, and which can be used for planes to follow all of their flight plans without a single word being transmitted over the radio, and everything takes place using screens and keyboards. So I think that, given that today electronics are within everybody's reach, it is highly likely that over the next few years, pilots who today are who, because they're deaf, are not allowed to enter into controlled zones, may very well be able to have this possibility, including for small airfields, such as, for example, Muro, which is not controlled today, but one could consider having an obligatory system in all aircrafts which would provide accessibility for deaf pilots for flying in general.
In the future, I hope the deaf pilots will be able to access training more easily and will not constantly come up against the obstacles encountered by the present team. So you can see that our team, we really fought hard. There are already examples. So I really hope that they can see that it's possible and that it will be easier for them in the future. The struggles experienced by these enthusiasts shows that anything is possible.
Give me a last chance to concentrate. Oh no, I will shine. Shine is gone. No, 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 I will shine. Shine is gone. I will shine. Shine is gone. No, 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 I will shine. Shine is gone. Give my heart, feeling so confused, and I never dream when you're in my bed.